BSC recently organized a tournament in the SESA-ANZ region, and boys, there are a lot we can learn from it. We're just going to focus on the finals and even that the main errors made, because if we did a whole tournament, this video would be way too long. The final round was played by the Showdown mains and Among Us Gaming. Game 1, Hard Rock Mine, both teams going with relatively safe picks. Both teams picked a safe right, not too experimental. Mid is interesting, 8-bits can go toe-to-toe in theory, but which 8-bit succeeds would largely be dependent on which team as a whole puts more pressure. SDM instantly wins lane with Rico. Rosa didn't risk it and decided to go across the map for some reason. Rico could have pushed up to the enemy side and taken the bush on the left, since that is a very annoying place for Rico to be, but he chooses not to. SDM Colt negates Og Rico's advantage by knocking out the wall between them in order to place his shots. That's one thing to remember about Rico. In direct fire, Rico is weak, so breaking walls that a Rico may be bouncing around is always a good strat to use. Rosa joins Og Rico in an attempt to shift control, but Og's attempt to shift control actually came back to bite them, as they ended up allowing the Rico and 8-bit to push into Og 8-bit and regain control on the left. Meanwhile, Og Rosa gets stuck in the enemy spawn and easily gets wiped. Rosa overextends a bit there. Holding the lane should have been a higher priority this early in the game. STM managed to control mid for just a moment. Of course, grip doesn't hold for too long, and Og, Rosa and Rico swap lanes in order to try and handle their matchups better. Rosa pops that gadget to try and corner the Colt. Colt, losing his lane, instantly allows Rosa to push back up into the enemy spawn and force STM back. Rico on the left could have held the lane, but ignores Og Rico in an attempt to deter Og 8-bit. Og 8-bit made a bit of a blunder trying to help Rosa and allowed himself to be pushed back. Again, STM 8-bit could have helped mid by himself. Og Rico manages to corner SDM Rico and tries to use his super to try and finish his opponent off, but ended up wasting it completely. He seemed to have panicked a bit there. Certainly Og Rico had the advantage, but that misfire shifted the matchup in STM's favor. Rosa gets double teamed on the right by Colt and Rico, once again forcing Og back. Og Rico walks up the left lane, but not quite far enough to make a difference. He's too wary of that 8-bit and Colt that would probably melt him had he gotten too close. For the second time, Og Rico empties a full super, but Colt chooses the perfect moment to bulldoze through the wall right when his opponent was locked in the super animation and was the most vulnerable. Another point to keep in mind is that it's best not to use a long super that close to an enemy, because since your super takes a long time to finish, the enemy can take advantage of that vulnerability if you happen to miss. 8-bit goes for a bit of a risky move there to teleport back as he grabs the gem, but the risk pays off as STM grabs the first win. Heading into set 2, Og swaps Rosa out for Mr. P, STM swaps Colt out for Max. Right off the bat, Showdown mains dominate. Rico pops off on the left, knocking both the Og mid and lane from the game. Max handling Penguin Man on the right with extreme ease. That Mr. P pick came as a surprise to me as to how they were planning on using it, but at 30 seconds in, not much is really showing. STM now have to keep their dominance on the field. Max overextends a bit there in an attempt to try and spawn trap. I always say how spawn trapping isn't about harassing the enemy as much as it is about maintaining mid control, and Max's slip up could have easily cost the game, but at this point STM's at quite a comfortable lead of 7-0, looking strong in the mid game. Max repeatedly overextending there. The intention of pushing the 8-bit out is clear, but with the amount of health she has, it was destined to fail. The Mr. P pick still confounds me. It does not synergize with the existing team, and he easily falls to a lot of brawlers in this game. When picking a comp, you really need to think about how each brawler complements the others, like how Max can give 8-bit a speed boost or how 8-bit can give Rico a damage boost. Mr. P doesn't fit in here as far as I can tell anyway. SDM Rico finally gets in the enemy spawn and is being the menace he's meant to be. He does get double teamed by Rico and 8-bit. At this point, SDM have triggered the countdown and it's already too late. Would Og have benefited from switching matchups between Mr. P and Rico, given how much Max was using those corners to harass Mr. P and how Rico tended to attack from behind cover? Possibly. I feel like that matchup should have switched when they respawned the first time. Then again, SDM Rico maintained his lane incredibly well throughout the entire game, so whether or not this would have made a significant enough difference is uncertain. The second round was played in Siege, Junk Park. STM played Frank Max Primo, Og played BB Bali Carl. STM's strat was to have Max's support and chip the enemy, allowing the tanks, especially Frank, to score easier kills. Og relied a little bit too heavily on Bali's ability to gradually decrease enemy health for Carl and BB to swoop in, but Bali struggled there against the Mac-Frank combo. The entire purpose of the Og comp is in pushing up, but it lacks staying power or the ability to remain in control and lacks support value as opposed to SDM running a double tank comp. A much more ground-oriented control like Ems or Sandy would have provided far more value than any thrower against a tank comp. There's very little Carl could actually do in terms of taking taking Primo down, because Primo easily controls the corners matched up against Carl, so Carl would want to keep his distance, giving him an immediate handicap against Primo, who's basically sitting on the bolt spawns. We can see here in round 1 how BB tries to get in some good hits, but without Barley to chip the Frank's health, there's not much she could have done. By the second siege, STM already has assumed control of the field, and in a control-oriented game mode, you want to be the one in control. We can see this switch in matchup this time around, BB taking the Primo while Carl and Barley focus on the Frank Max duo. Definitely played their cards right that time around, that BB's mere existence is enough to keep Max back. The Max Super is wasted, however, as STM's bot has already spawned. Max Super could have been saved for a bit later, but it was activated a tad too early and reduced its effectivity. The final siege finds STM in a good lead. Carl and BB struggle against their matchups as before. Active noise cancellation, hard counters that knock back. Tanks tend to have a lot of staying power, especially against brawlers with less DPS than them, like Carl and BB in this case. Over on the left, Barley pushes Max back, successfully attempting to make a dive. In fact, Max could have held her own, but over here we see SD and Primo make a terrible miscalculation. That Barley was not threatening Max enough to warrant that super. Primo should have been focusing more on the Carl, but when he diverted his attention to Barley, he instantly made an opening for Org Carl. Could Primo have defeated Carl then and there? Yes, quite easily. Would it have made a difference? Also yes, since Barley wasn't going anywhere. Frank had BB cornered, SDM and Primo would have been free to help with the final push. Opening into game 2, Org seems pretty confident with their comp. SDM team has opted to switch Max and Primo out for Pam and BB. BB pops a gadget and rushes for the first bolt. Really all she was trying to do was buy time long enough to secure that first bolt. Meanwhile on the right we can see Org BB taking Frank and Pam on at the same time. When your brawler relies on close range damage to an enemy, it's a good practice to avoid the chip damage brawlers altogether. A lot of short ranges tend to fall in battles of attrition. Org a little too focused on the left alone, and like I said earlier, in a control oriented game you want to be in control, forcing the enemy back, not the other way around. There was also the issue of Barley being torn between attacking the STM BB or the Frank, but paired with Pam's healing, Frank is an immovable rock. The Carl Pam matchup was definitely a lot easier considering that flying hook provides incredible fallback value. Carl didn't necessarily need to engage the Pam at all, just waited out for the bot really. Org really struggled with their ability to hold an area down with the Frank Pam comp on the other side. SDM did manage to nab the final bot, but they were not able to do damage to the Ike in time. Overall, SDM simply had more staying power. The Pam healing Frank combo lasted a long time and was able to hold out against the world of attacks they had thrown at them in the second round. Going into the final round, Org finally decides to play Frank, swapping him out for BB. As with the Mr. P pick from earlier, I fail to see how he synergizes here. I'm assuming that Frank is meant to take on enemies where the Barley weakens, or perhaps Frank would simply capitalize on area Barley cleared, but the fact that Frank has no support like SDM played in the last 2 rounds leaves him at the risk of the enemy, and risk it was. STM played a fantastic synergy of Gale, Colette and Colt. Now in a more control oriented game this would be harder to make use of, but because Org played Carl and Frank, STM was able to easily handle the situation. The first round had no competition. Freezing Snow is a great star power to play alongside its sharpshooter in mid to long range maps, as the temporary slowing makes it easier for the sharpshooters to aim. Org was outplayed from the beginning. The game wasn't really ground control oriented up until this point, and you can see just how obnoxious and, dare I say, toxic a ground control comp can be against something that cannot handle it. Couple that with immense DPS and you've got a formula for victory.